Hello and welcome to the third episode of my trip down memory lane on the Pacific Crest Trail and to my through hike exactly 10 years ago. In the last episode we walked from Julian to Idyllwild and then did our first 0 day there, which was very pleasant after, I think 170 some miles of hard trekking through the desert. And next up there would be a big highlight, Mount San Jacinto. Mount San Jacinto is a mountain over 3,300 meters high that stands in the middle of the desert, and it's not directly on the Pacific Crest Trail, but very close to it, and most hikers make this little detour and hike up this fantastic mountain, which is really very worthwhile, as you'll see later. Idyllwild itself is already at a certain altitude of, I think, a little over 1,600 meters, so it was completely different environment than we were used to after hiking in the desert for so long. And then we were taken a little further by Devilfish, the trail angel who had already taken us several times now. And he took us to the Devil's Slide Trail, and I think we were at a little over 2,000 meters when we started the next stage of our hike. And you can really see that we are now in a completely different terrain, a completely different climatic environment, and that was fascinating. Just a day and a half before we had been in the driest desert imaginable, and now here we are. We were warned in various ways that what we were about to encounter was not without danger. It simply says hazardous conditions, but there were also other signs pointing out the danger of high altitudes, the danger of weather changes, and the danger of mountain tours in general. And that gave us a little bit of a feeling that something bigger was coming up, and we set off relatively euphorically and were soon rewarded with amazing views. You can see that there are trees and rocks everywhere, and it was really crazy feeling because we were basically still in the desert. And this is something we do not know from Germany or Europe in general, that the terrain changes so much in just a few kilometers on foot. But that was the case here, and it was very, very exciting to see. What also has been very exciting was that we gained altitude so quickly. So in the desert you're almost at sea level, and now we were at 2,500 meters and higher and higher, and I really started to notice that. It is said that you should climb a maximum of 1,000 meters a day and then rest for a night, and I noticed that I was finding it harder and harder to hike, and we took a lot of breaks. For example, here where we saw snow for the first time, which was totally bizarre thing, of course, because somehow it was super warm and we felt like we were in the desert because we just had been there, and suddenly there was snow. It was great, of course, somehow this contrast, and we used the snow to put it under our bandanas to cool our foreheads a bit and so on, but it was just totally crazy to suddenly be in the snow, even though it was 40 degrees Celsius in the shade 2 days ago. And but it was a really welcome change to see the terrain changed a bit, and then San Jacinto is also a good test moment, I guess, for the high Sierras later on, where we'll be going to similar and even higher altitudes, but in comparable terrain as far as rocks and trees and so are concerned. So this is, you can't read it now, of course, but this is another warning. It was very detailed description of all the dangers, and here it simply says in bold letters, you are responsible for knowing this. So you are responsible for knowing this if you go on, And I found that quite funny. As I had already mentioned, I mainly hike in Norway, and there are the craziest, most dangerous trails that are signposted as normal hiking trails, so nobody cares whether you are prepared or not. In any case, it doesn't say anything about dangers. It just says, it's easy to walk along here, and then you get there and sometimes there is no recognizable path at all, and so on. So that's a completely different perception of danger than we have here in the US on the PCT, because it was totally easy to walk there. It was just exhausting because of the altitude, but the path itself was still well trodden, and nice and wide and didn't have any technical demands or anything. But the altitude was getting to me more and more, so I was already experiencing what I would say a preliminary stage of altitude sickness. So I was really wheezing, and I hadn't experienced it like this before. I'd been at over 3,000 meters before, but I'd already been at over 2,000 meters for a week there also. So this acclimatization phase that you always do when mountaineering in the ideal case, that is of course completely absent here when you climb from almost sea level to over 3,000 meters within 2 days. And that really challenged me. And yes, I can remember that I was really, really panting there. But of course, views like that always made you realize that it's always worth it. So it wasn't like I was in some sort of mortal danger or anything. It was just really, really exhausting. And yeah, it was actually the first time on the trail that I really felt it physically. And it's actually a good thing when you realize that you're really putting a strain on your cardiovascular system. Because up to now, I've been just flying through the desert, apart from the heat, of course. And this was a new challenge. This was a physical challenge. But it also motivated me, so I really wanted to get up there and do it. And I remember that at some point we were in small groups. We weren't all together anymore, so there were a lot of people on the road that day, and we motivated each other. And at some point we got into a rut where we could do it, even though it was still incredibly exhausting. So yeah, that was one of the most exhausting days on the whole trail, I think. This and the day before Whitney, which we'll see later in this series. As you can see, there was more and more snow then, so here in the background you can still see the desert down there, and that's just, well, if you haven't experienced it, you can't imagine how crazy it is to experience this contrast. It's probably like if you had the most glorious sunshine on one day and then somehow had hail or something. So it was kind of a crazy situation that we were in. Here in this hut, you could spend the night. There were beds in there, but above all, there were also a few very exhausted hikers in there. They had spent the night there and were somehow not really at ease. And they didn't really know whether they wanted to go up there now or not, but in the end they still managed to get up there. But I wasn't the only one who found the effort of the climb difficult. But apart from that, it's a really cool place to spend the night. Yeah, so here we are at the summit finally, and it was really awesome. On one side you could see the desert, and on the other side you could see a sea of clouds. Totally fascinating. Here I zoom out of the desert, really down there, and then really up to 3,300 something meters, where you feel like you're in a completely different world. So it's a bit like if you've ever seen the photos of Kilimanjaro. It's in the middle of a flat landscape, and it was a bit like that. I mean, there's a very small mountain range here that stands relatively isolated in the desert, while the other mountains in the desert are like 1,000 meters high or something like that. And also there's a lot of flat ground. But then you have this mountain range, which are suddenly so high and where you suddenly encounter a completely different landscape. And I find that very fascinating. There are even supposed to be bears here. And I think that's funny too, because they have such a tiny, terrain only in this small mountain area, because they don't exist in the desert itself. Of course, they can't find anything to eat there. And yeah, but yeah, we really enjoyed it, and we must have taken a 2-hour break or something on the summit. We also rested there because we were really exhausted. Yeah, as soon as we got to the top and sat there, it was pleasant, and it wasn't too cold. It wasn't super warm either, but it was pleasant. So you can see that I'm wearing my rain jacket here, and I only wore it when it rained or when it was really cold and windy. But no shoes, so the temperature was probably still bearable. But you can tell that you've been at a certain altitude by the temperature, which is logical if there is snow up there. Yes, but I remember that we had a really nice break, and there were quite a few people up there, and I had a good chat with them. There were a few older gentlemen who had also made they had made a day trip up here, and they were speaking German, and I had a good conversation with them, and it was generally the case that I met quite a lot of people in the US who spoke German, which surprised me. I didn't even know that they were interested in learning German. I mean, for what reason? But apparently, you can learn it at school in some states, and some people do. And I've actually met German speaking Americans of all ages who had no German relatives. And I was always quite happy to speak German, and so did they. They were always happy when they could practice the language with a real German. And yes, I can remember that we had a good chat, and well, here are a few more photos from the summit. Just an amazing landscape. Well, this one is much lower, and you can see that the terrain is different again. This is the more typical desert terrain that we had before. So the fact that we now had this beautiful forest was really only because we were so high up at over 3,000 meters. And the tree line is very clear, very clearly defined. So you can see it here too. There are no trees there, and there are the trees on this little hilltop. It was just crazy to experience it like that and to hike through it. The next day is going to be even more crazy. Well, at some point in the evening, late afternoon or something like that, we walked away from the summit, and we planned to look for a place to camp not far from the summit and then just camp there. And that turned out to be almost impossible because there were no campsites at all. There were no flat areas where you could camp. We were 4 people in 3 tents at the time in our group, and there was simply no space where we could have pitched them all. And then we walked down the mountain and got closer and closer to this cloud cover, which looks really great. It was really beautiful to look at it, but back there you can look out over the mountains as if you were in an airplane. But it became very unpleasantly cold. It was blowing very strongly, and the humidity naturally increased due to the clouds. And then we slowly reached a point where we had already walked, 20 miles, including the steep climb. And then we just wanted to sleep, because at some point we couldn't do anymore. It was getting dark, and we walked around for a while and tried to find something which also gave us these great moments, of course, but it was very exhausting. And yeah, but seeing the mountains sink into the Alpenglow, as we call it, and then seeing the clouds in the evening light, it was beautiful. And yes, even though we were so exhausted, we really enjoyed it because it was simply a special sight. Here we are already at about the same level as the clouds, and yes, it looks heavenly, as if we were somehow in a fantasy world. And yeah, but it got dark and we still hadn't found a place to camp, and we were really starting to feel a bit screwed. And then we thought, well, what are we going to do if we can't find anything? Then we thought about whether we should go cowboy camping, without a tent, which is not so rare on a PCT in a desert, where it never rains and so on. You can do it quite well, but as I said, it was pretty windy and cold, and we really wanted the wind protection in form of our tents, because otherwise, we would have cooled down relatively quickly probably in our quilts. And at some point we just arrived at a place that we had already seen on our trail notes that it existed, but we didn't really want to go that far. But then we went there anyway for a lack of alternatives. And then there was this other hiker, Sketch, who I think I wore the t-shirt of in episode 1. He's an artist who always drew fine liner drawings on a PCT and colored them with watercolors. And we already met him a few times, and he was there, and he had made a campfire in a fire bowl that was there at the campsite. And of course that was really great because we could warm up up there first, and then we set up our tents. And yeah, Sketch, I think he wanted to chat a bit more, but we were so exhausted that we fell into the tent and more or less fell asleep straight away. I don't even know if we had dinner after that, but I mean, probably did, but it was definitely like that when we were so exhausted from the day. And but it was a very fulfilling day with great impressions and great experiences. The next morning, the clouds still hadn't cleared. Well, a little bit anyway, but they had split up, and I found it really interesting that we were almost exactly at the height of the upper cloud cover, but it wasn't as thick as, so we could see the lower cloud cover too, and I thought that was really cool. I'd never seen anything like that before, and I probably never see anything like it again, with a 2-layer cloud cover like that. And yeah, then even the mountains on top of that. I thought it was another great sight. Yeah, and then began a very, very long descent. The next destination we had was the house of Ziggy and the bear, trail angels who lived in Cabazon, I think that this village is called. And they had hikers staying with them for several years. They were quite old, I think over 80. And yeah, they just lived down there somewhere in the valley, again, in the middle of the desert. And that's where we wanted to go. But that meant we had to descend almost 3,000 meters, and that's brutal. It's so hard on the knees, and if you're really going downhill all the time, it's easier to fall. I fell several times, even on that day, because I don't know, somehow you still have the weight of the backpack which tips you forward the whole time, and somehow I don't know if your body loses its center of gravity at some point, so that you just kind of fall forward. It was really super exhausting, and yeah, but of course it was also blessed with great views. So when you see it like this, you're going down here and you can see where you're going the whole time. That's kind of an incentive when you have your goal in front of you, even if it's still many, many miles away. But you can see it, and then I'm going down here now, and you can see the process and how far you've come and so on, and it's enjoyable. It was great to run down there, but also really exhausting, as I said. And in between, we passed the 2,000 mile marker, so another 100 miles done, which I celebrated with a little blueberry pie here. And I can still remember today how delicious that was. It was really super tasty. Again, who knows if I would have found it just as great at home? Probably not, but it was really, really delicious. Such a crispy short crust pastry, and then such a nice gooey blueberry filling. It was really very good, and I celebrated another milestone with it. So this guy here, this snake, I almost stepped on it. So the path, it came from up here, and the snake, so I kind of wanted to go this way, and I didn't see the snake at all because it was lying there stiff as a board. But a lizard ran over its head, and I was a bit stunned because I didn't want to step on the lizard. And that moment, I saw that there was a snake lying there, and I was terrified. And then I made a huge leap, but it didn't do anything. It didn't react at all. I mean, it was alive, but it was just chilling there in its stupor and didn't want anything from me. And I haven't been able to find out what kind of snake it is. So if you know, please let me know in the comments. But I've been told that it's probably not poisonous. But it was gigantic. As you can see here, it goes all the way back into the bushes. And it was definitely the biggest snake I've seen on the whole trail. Yeah, but after the initial scare, it was a great experience, especially because I was so close to it. So nothing zoomed in or anything from this position. As I said, I jumped over it, and yeah, it was a great animal to see. Well, and then I was at the bottom, and here in the background you can still see San Jacinto, and we had camped here or there, and it's crazy when you look back and realize that you were up there yesterday, and now you're in the snow, and now you're back down here in the total desert at 40 degrees Celsius. No water, hardly any plants, just a few bushes, and it's just this contrast. I've already mentioned it a few times. It's totally crazy. It's just surreal when you walk along there and look at this short distance, what a difference it makes to the landscape. I don't think I've ever experienced that anywhere else in Europe. Our terrain just changes very gradually, usually. So yeah, and then it went on for a while. I would say about 5 or 6 miles or so on this flat land through the flat desert, and we passed under this drawbridge where a huge train was passing, where you could see neither the beginning nor the end. But at some point, a Hamburg South wagon came by, which I thought was really nice. Of course, a little feeling of home. And yeah, I took a break here under the bridge. There were a few other hikers again with San Jacinto in view, which was also very cool. And then we arrived at Ziggy and the Bear, and I can remember it was very well signposted in the village where you had to go. And then you went in through a small gate, and there was a volunteer, a young woman who worked for Ziggy and the Bear in the summer. She lived there with them and managed all sorts of things. I guess for board and lodging, I suppose. And then she did the registration. You get a number there and everything. It was very well organized. And yeah, so here in these tents, we could sleep, and they had carpets on their ground in their garden all over the place. And there was a sanitary house here in the corner, which had a shower, and it was in some kind of construction trailer, I think. And yeah, there was a toilet, a shower, and we made ourselves a bit comfortable. I had a bit of a snack, and then at some point there was a collective order from the nearest pizza place, and we ordered a nice pizza, and we had a shower and just spent a really nice evening there. And when we were all in our sleeping bags already after brushing our teeth, in the evening, Ziggy came out and handed out ice cream to everyone, a sandwich ice cream. And I found that quite funny because everybody was already in bed, so to say. And I can remember her walking around the people laying on the ground, and then she stood on the porch and said, "Anybody had ice cream? Okay, yeah, good night." And then she went in, and I thought that was a really warm and welcoming atmosphere that we got a bedtime treat, and it was like our mother would treat us. It was really nice experience. And yeah, of course we really enjoyed the ice cream. So we don't, dental care on the trail is a bit lacking anyway. So of course you brush your teeth, but maybe sometimes you let slide it a bit, and the ice cream was okay. Anyway, we all had a nice lie down, ate ice cream, and then it was lights out, and then it started to rain, which is crazy because it actually never rains there. I mean, like once or twice a year. And I heard it's somehow the windiest place in California or something. There was also a big wind farm there, but it doesn't really rain there. And of course it had to rain that night. We were lucky. We slept here on this side, and somehow we didn't get so wet. But other people who slept here, like this and there, they got completely soaked. And yeah, of course there was a bit of a downer. I'm also looking very sad here because it was still raining when we woke up and in the morning, and you could see that everything is completely wet here. And yeah, then we were told that there would be more storms to follow, and we were a bit undecided whether we should go on now or whether we should somehow have another 0 day and wait it out. But then in the end we decided to hike on, and that was a good thing because in the end it didn't rain at all. I can remember this ascent very well. So here it was like this. You actually went back into this landscape. So the PCT goes down from San Jacinto into the desert, and then it goes up again. And this ascent here, we raced up so fast. And when we were at the top, we were just completely exhausted. Then we sat there and everyone was really panting. And then various Americans came along and said, "Wow, you're so fast, you're so crazy Germans." And we were like, "Yeah, thanks," but it was no use to us because we were so exhausted that we couldn't hike on. So sometimes it's better to hike slow and not overdo it. But we took a proper break there. I think I had some great pecan rolls or something there. That was really, really nice, especially with this view, of course. And then we went on into the desert. So it was a bit hilly, and there were some small foothills where there were small sections of forest again, but we were potentially heading back into the real desert. And I found it quite pleasant after the little excursion into the forest, because the running there is simply beautiful, with little incline and with beautiful views, which I always like very much. Up here we can see a riverbed, and there's also a small stream, but it used to be much wider before this extreme drought that we had. And now it is wider again. I recently saw a video, so it seems like this has come back to a more steady flow. But back in 2015 there was only the small stream, but it was of course enough for us to get some water. And we met some guys there, some other hikers, who were saying that there was a big thunderstorm coming in, and we were like, oh no, damn, what are we going to do? Are we going to hike on or what? But it turned out to be false alarm. So, you know, all the information we got on trail about weather, about water and stuff like that, it was all hearsay, because we didn't have any mobile data back then. I just had got my first smartphone specifically for the PCT, and but we only could use the internet when we had Wi-Fi. And sometimes the towns even did not have Wi-Fi, so we had to check out the libraries or so and use actually PCs. Well, it was a different time. It's also a crazy thing to think about 10 years later. So what I was saying is that every information that we got was just, unproven. And some of those turned out to be absolutely not true. And you just had to find it all out on the go somehow, and that's actually something I enjoyed back then, that it adds a certain aspect of unpredictability, which of course made the whole thing more adventurous, and I did enjoy that. Today I would probably check the weather forecast all the time, although I don't think there is any reception at all in many parts of the trail. But here we had a little look back at the beautiful mountains when we then walked further and further away from them. And I can remember in this video here, we also took a longer break. It was totally cold somehow. I don't know. I think the wind was somehow blowing over the hilltop, or it was the effect from the storm that was supposedly coming. In any case, it was a bit chilly there, but it was still a good spot for a break. And now we were getting closer to Big Bear Lake, which was our next big destination. And Big Bear Lake is a very nice place. It's a tourist place on a nice big lake, and there was this trail angel Papa Smurf who had made a water cache here and who brought a few drinks to the trail. And of course, as always, we were very happy to see that, and we got some water, and I also had my first Mountain Dew there, the first Mountain Dew of my life. I didn't even know it existed before that. I don't think it was available in Germany back then. It is now, but it's still not a very popular drink. And I also don't like it here. I think that was just another one of these phenomena with things that I like being on a trail and don't like being at home, because I really enjoyed it there in this moment. I thought it was a very tasty drink, and it was probably just me needing energy from the sugar or whatever. So Mountain Dew, that's what I drank there. And then we walked into the evening again. I can remember that evening we were a bit split up, but we had already discussed beforehand, so the four of us, where we wanted to camp, and at some point I arrived at the spot, and I think the others were already there. In any case, I really enjoyed this time here again, looking into the distance in the beautiful evening light. It was just wonderful. And we then saw our first deer, which I thought was really great. So we stood there, and the deer didn't mind at all. I mean, it was kind of cautious, but it didn't run away immediately, and I really enjoyed seeing it. We had mainly seen reptiles and insects and arachnids so far, but no larger animals, and I really wanted to see bears and all kinds of mammals that you can see in the high Sierras. And then, of course, it was a nice little present relatively early on, because there were still a few 100 kilometers of desert ahead of us before we would hit the Sierras. Yeah, here we can see into the distance again. So, we were still at a slightly higher altitude. There was a mishmash of landscapes, which I also found very beautiful. And then we went to Big Bear. We had booked a hostel in advance, a lodge, unbeatable price, $20 per night per person, which was pretty cheap even for that time, because this deal included a shuttle service from the trace. So we were picked up from the hostel owner, taken to the hostel. We could stay there in a 4-bedroom, and there was everything we needed: internet, washing machine, shower, of course, and on top of all of that, there was breakfast and dinner included. So that was really a great deal. And we had somehow seen it in a Facebook group, I think, and then called and arranged it. And we had a great time there. We also had a 0 day in Big Bear, and I specifically enjoyed the hammock. It was so nice to just hang in there and just relax. And then we walked around the city, and I found these comfortable chairs, for example, and liked to sit in there. And you cannot imagine how much you miss a chair in the wilderness. So just leaning against something is so pleasant when you're sitting and all the time without a backrest. And that's really annoying. It's exhausting. So, I mean, there are hikers with these little foldable chairs, but I don't use one of them myself. But I do miss a backrest in the wilderness. I was once in Sweden sitting around a fireplace with some other people, and one of them said, "Oh man, I would give a kingdom for a backrest." And it's actually really like that. So you miss that very, very quickly. Yeah, and then we just enjoyed a bit of town life. We did like we did on the last 0 day, and we had resupply, and we met a woman at the store, a young mother who was about to move to Europe, and she had some kind of food vouchers that you get, I don't know, as a socially disadvantaged family or something, and she paid for all our shopping and a lot more. So she just she had so many of these vouchers, and she couldn't use them all before moving to Europe, so this would just go to waste, I guess. And she was heavily paying for our stuff, and she was loading our cart full of food, more than we could take. So we made a few guys in the lodge very happy too. So that was a really nice trail magic for us. And so she was also super nice. She brought us back to our lodge, and we had a great chat, and her son was super cute, and we had a great time with her. And unfortunately, I have no contacts of her. I don't know where she lives now, and if she made it to Europe or whatever. But it was a very nice encounter on the trail with her. And so that's it. And at some point, we packed everything up and took the shuttle back to the trail. But we will find out what happens next in the next episode. And yes, as always, if you liked it, please subscribe to my channel. Leave me a comment if you want to tell me anything, if you have any questions. And other than that, I will see you in the next episode. Ciao!